You're listening to the Lost Geographer podcast, and this is episode 22 on Israel.
In our modern globalized society, understanding geography and culture is crucial if you want to succeed in life. Unfortunately, many people are still unaware of the world around them, which is fueled by media that are focused only on profits, clicks, and promoting agendas rather than providing accurate information. Here at the Lost Geographer, we aim to promote geographic and cultural literacy through education and travel by bypassing the media. We have guests who talk about their own countries from a native perspective, travelers telling their stories and lessons, and related topics that will aid you on your journey towards geographic and cultural literacy. Get the raw, candid truth about the world we live in and understand your place in it. Because at the end of the day, it's your world. Own it.
Hey everybody, so while this podcast and site do increase your geographic and cultural literacy, the best way to attain literacy is through travel. Now, I understand that many people think traveling is expensive and stressful, and understandably so. However, it doesn't have to be this way. Traveling can be cheap and relatively stress-free if you know the right places to look for flights and already have an understanding of common travel mistakes. If you want to learn how, check out The Ultimate Guide to Smart Budget Traveling. It's a video course that will teach you how to save hundreds on your next vacation and thousands throughout your life by showing you how to make different rewards programs work for you and introduce you to sites that have prices you could have only dreamed of. I will show you how I've done things such as book transatlantic and transcontinental flights in the US for less than $10, and how I don't pay ATM fees anywhere in the world and withdraw money according to the exact exchange rate and not get ripped off. Want to learn more? Check out literacy.thelostgeographer.net for more information, and for a limited time only, I have taken off 67% of the course's original price to provide it to you for just $19 using the code SUMMERTRAVEL, all one word. Consider it an investment to learn how to invest in experiences to become geographically and culturally literate. Again, you can find it at literacy.thelostgeographer.net.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Lost Geographer podcast, where our goal is to promote geographic and cultural literacy. It's your world, own it. I'm your host, Rohit Amruthar, founder of The Lost Geographer. You can find us at www.thelostgeographer.net as always. And in this week's episode, I'm excited to have Kevin from Israel, whose actual Jewish name is Hadar Achiad Chazoni.
Very nice.
Hadar Achiad Chazoni. Man. All right.
Most Americans can't say that, not even close.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Kevin, I'm going to call you Kevin because that's easier.
Go right ahead. That's fine.
Anyway, Kevin, it's great to have you on this podcast, man.
Thanks for having me, man. It's an adventure.
Yeah. So, let's get started with this podcast. So, tell us about yourself, a little bit about you, where you're from, and where all you've lived.
All right. I'm 20 years old, and I lived the first 5 years of my life in what people will call the West Bank. In Hebrew, we call it the Shomron. And then I moved with my family to Jerusalem, where I lived for another 15 years. And right now, I'm traveling the world. That's how I ended up here. I did a first semester in college. I studied Bible education and history, and I intend to finish it. I consider myself a very knowledgeable Jew as far as Judaism goes and Jewish culture. Very Israeli in some aspects, and adventurous human being in general, yeah.
Cool. All right, well, let's get started with some of the questions. So, talk to us a little bit about some of the manners and etiquettes that people observe in Israel. So, you've traveled a little bit to the UK and America. So, what do you feel like is different that they observe in Israel as opposed to the other places you've been?
All right. Well, first of all, Israelis are so much more aggressive than Americans. Like, Israelis will walk up and tell you that you're doing something wrong if they think you're doing something wrong. Israelis will tell you that you're not pushing a child's stroller right, or if you're not, they might come up to you and be like, your kid is not wearing a coat and it's cold outside. That's not, and things like that. And they'll get super aggressive on the road. If they think you did something wrong, they will start screaming at you. They're in general, very aggressive, very confrontational people. I think, and also sometimes in a good way, it shows they care, So they might come up to you and say, I'll give an example. I was smoking next to the airport in Israel when I wanted to fly. And I just started smoking, and then somebody walked up over to me, and he said, don't smoke here. If you smoke here, you'll get fined. And then in the United States, I was smoking in a place where I shouldn't have smoked. I just didn't realize there was a sign, and people walked by, and they didn't say anything. And then I looked up, and I was like, oh, there was a sign here, so why didn't anybody tell me about that sign? So I think Israelis definitely feel like they have more of a right to like get up in your face about stuff, for the better and for worse. Israelis tend to be very realistic, so they don't like playing a lot of like false, fake sort of, what's it called? Easy talk? What's it called?
Small talk?
Small talk. They don't like talking like small talk, and they don't like it, really spending time speaking to people they don't know very well. They tend to be much more like, if I know you, then I want to be your friend, and then we talk about really important things that are important to us. If I don't know you, then I don't want to talk to you and just leave me alone. Which makes it a little bit harder to make friends with Israelis than with Americans. I feel like as Americans, it's much easier to like start talking to them. But you find that that Israelis who are good friends, very dependable friends, and they'll stay your friends for a long time. And even if you don't talk to them for a while, you need something, they'll be there for you. Definitely, I think that friendship is hard to come by, but definitely worth a lot more for Israelis.
So it's more about depth rather than how many friends you have.
Yeah, certainly. A lot of people, like as far as if they grow up in certain neighborhoods in Jerusalem or in Tel Aviv or in places like that, or definitely if you come from towns, then they'll have a certain group of friends and they'll be their friends their entire life. They'll draft to the same place in the military and then they'll move back home and they'll be the same group of people, that their entire life.
So people don't really move far from home?
Not so much. I mean, first of all, you gotta understand, there is no far from home in Israel.
That's true.
Israel is a very small place. It's about 60 minutes across and about 4.5 hours from top to bottom. So anywhere you go, you're still near home. And then above that, like on top of that, like half of the population of the country lives in Tel Aviv metropolitan area. So there isn't very far from home. And if you did move, then the chances are that you grew up on a town and you moved to a big city. And again, that's not far away. So I would say people move around a lot in cities, but it's very, very easy to stay in touch with friends and family. And I think that definitely helps people. Family is very important to Israelis. Definitely on the holidays, but also just in general, family is very, very important and people stay in touch a lot.
So because Israel is a Jewish state, I'm assuming religion plays a huge part in a lot of the manners and etiquette as well.
Well, yes, for sure. 100%. Things like the Sabbath, which is on Saturday. Basically, nobody works. Basically, no public transportation works. And,
is it every Saturday?
Every single Saturday. Well, really, the way it works in Judaism is that the days start from the evening before. From Friday evening, when the sun goes down, until Saturday evening, when the sun goes down, that's the Sabbath. And there's no public transportation. Almost all the stores are closed, like the vast majority. I'm talking about like 98%. In Jerusalem, it's like 99.9%. Maybe in Tel Aviv, you can find a little bit more stuff open. And people don't work at all. Like even if you're a private person, and people go out a lot, people socialize, and the family aspect again comes in very hard, like family dinners and going to synagogue together. Even people who are not super religious will go to synagogue together. It's like a family time for everyone in Israel.
So that, I think we were talking a little bit about this earlier, but the fact that, you're all Jewish and that you all do go to synagogues, that makes you feel like you were saying basically everyone in Israel is your brother, right?
Yeah. Well, there is actually a saying in Hebrew, Kol Yisrael Achim, or Kol Yisrael Chaverim, both of them. And it means all Israel are brothers, or all Israel is friends. Meaning that all Jews, in the end of the day, in a certain sense, see themselves not as adherents to the same religion, but as a very big extended family. And definitely, I'm not going to say every single person in the country, but definitely because of the way that Israel is so small and everybody goes through very similar things, such as drafting in the military and just the high schools or system, which is it's very similar. So anybody you meet, even though there are a lot of differences, chances are there are a whole lot of similarities. And so there's definitely a big feeling of togetherness and a feeling of, in the end of the day, regardless of our differences, we're family and we're here for each other.
And that's great information. So moving on a little bit. So what would you say, A, is the business climate like there? And B, if I were to do business with an Israeli, how would that go? And I know Tel Aviv is like the huge startup hub.
Yeah, certainly. First of all, there's no need for you to learn Hebrew. And if you're American, you probably shouldn't, because Israelis are amused by Americans' attempts to speak Hebrew. But almost the vast majority of Israelis speak English. I mean, to pass high school, you have to know a certain amount of English to get your diploma. But even more than that, just almost everybody there speaks English. Definitely anybody in the public, private, economic climate will for sure speak English. So you don't need to learn Hebrew or anything, or Yiddish or anything like that. You should probably be aware of certain Jewish customs, like working on the Sabbath and things like that, because most Jews don't. I would say that Jews in general, and especially Israeli Jews, are very down to business kind of people. They want to get things done. They want to get them done right, and they want to get them done now. And they don't like messing around too much. And they love doing what they love doing, you know? So I think, I mean, what you refer to, the high tech, right? So there's a whole book written about a startup nation. And Israel is incredibly innovative in all technology, whether it's, chips that go into computers or artificial hearts and like everything. And I think that Israelis always love, working with other people and the attention, because we really do feel, and this is something, I don't know how politically correct this is, but Israelis tend to feel that the world likes us less than they should. You know, and that's the most gentle way I could put it. We definitely feel in general that we don't get enough credit for the innovations and the effort that we put in, and that not enough people work with us. I think that definitely something you experience a lot. So I think people would always be grateful for anybody overseas coming in, trying to do something together, collaborate.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah. It's funny that you're saying that about if you're American, don't try to learn Hebrew, because I've met some Jewish Americans who have gone to Israel and said they've gone on their birthright, and they've said that if they started speaking Hebrew, then they would just get replied to in English, just because they know that.
Yeah. So to be honest, Israelis also like showing off, so they also want to just show their English. But no, look, Anglo accented Hebrew really is unpleasant. Like, I mean, I am of that opinion. Everybody else in Israel is too, so maybe that's why I'm influenced into it. I personally don't mind the Russian accent. I don't mind the French accent. I really don't like the American accent, and I don't have any problem with English. I like English. I think it sounds great. But I was joking about the don't learn Hebrew. You should definitely learn Hebrew, especially if you're Christian or if you're Jewish. It's a great language. It's a beautiful language. And if you're of any kind of religion that subscribes to the Bible, then reading it in the original language is it's a different experience. It's amazing. So you should learn Hebrew. It's a great language.
Cool. And
just not for business. You don't need to learn it for business. That's what I was meant.
Got it. And can you describe the difference between Hebrew and Yiddish?
Yeah, certainly. Hebrew is a Semitic language, and it's super, super ancient. We're talking like 3,000 years minimum, ancient. Hebrew's alphabet went through a transformation, meaning that the letters you see now in written Hebrew, if you see a book or a Torah scroll or anything like that, are actually Assyrian letters. There is an ancient Hebrew written form, it's extinct. Nobody uses it. And some of the letters are missing, but we know now, because of archaeological digs and things like that, how to write most of it. Hebrew went through a lot of changes. It was influenced by many, many things. Modern Hebrew, although it's completely understandable through biblical Hebrew, like if you learn biblical Hebrew or you learn modern Hebrew, you'll understand completely. But if you learn the linguistics of it, they actually are separate. They're different. They have their structures or grammatical structures are different, and there are certain other things which I don't have time to explain right now are different. But in general, they're the same. And as the years progressed, Hebrew went from being used as a day-to-day, everyday language that people use, like during First Temple, Second Temple era. The Jews use it for business and for life, and they just spoke Hebrew. That's what they spoke. When the Jews got exiled the first time to Babylon, which was the capital, one of the main economic centers of this part of the world back then the Jews in business started learning Babylonian and Aramaic and Assyrian and things like that. And both Hebrew was heavily influenced by them, but also they started speaking those languages. So if you learn Jewish books that were written at the time, such as the Talmud, they're not written in Hebrew so much. They're actually written in Aramaic. It was actually a Jewish dialect of Aramaic, but it was Aramaic nonetheless. And Jews did that for thousands of years. It became that when you learn Torah and Torah studying and prayer, all those things were done in Hebrew. Hebrew was never forgotten, never lost. But slowly but surely, every other aspect of Jewish life began to be taken over by the spoken language in the country that the Jews were living in, because they didn't have their own country. And what ended up happening was that in certain places, especially where Jews and Judaism were flourishing and very strong, they sort of mutated the language of the place. They sort of amalgamated it, to create another language. So you have Ladino in Spain, which is somewhere between Spanish and Hebrew, and you have Yiddish, and there are others. Yiddish is somewhere between Hebrew and German, and there's a bit of Slavic, I think Russian thrown in there. But Yiddish is a much newer language. It's only 600, 700, 800 years old tops. And it wasn't not spoken by all Jews by any means at all. Only by the Polish and German and Lithuanian Jews, those kind of from sort of Eastern Europe kind of thing, Central Europe. The rest of the Jews of the world never spoke Yiddish. And most things written about Judaism or in Judaism or by Jews are not written in Yiddish. Judaism is a long, long, long history. Mm-hmm. And Yiddish is one of the more recent stops. And Hebrew has always been there and always will be there.
So do people in Israel speak Yiddish, or can they speak Yiddish?
Certainly. First of all, you can, to get your diploma, you have to choose a major, high school diploma. And you can choose Yiddish to be your major and learn Yiddish and speak it fluently. And second of all, very Orthodox religious communities keep a lot of the traditions from Europe, especially Polish and Lithuanian communities. And so they actually prefer to speak Yiddish on a day-to-day basis by the same belief that I said before, that they believe that Hebrew is a very holy language and should be used only for holy things, and mundane things should be done in Yiddish. And so certainly you can hear Yiddish. If you're in the streets of Jerusalem, you'll hear it on the buses, you hear it, and you can study it. It's everywhere.
Really cool. Really cool. Wow, I love that history lesson. So moving on, can you talk about some other interesting cultural facts that you think the audience could benefit from knowing about Israel?
Interesting and benefit are two different things. Definitely interesting. Israel is such a quirky place. There's so many interesting things about it. I mean, first of all, you're going to see plenty of teenagers walking around with rifles because all teenagers draft, and after a couple of weeks in the army or a couple of months, they get released home with their rifles. If you come to Israel on the festival of Purim, then you get to see people in costumes. It's like Halloween, basically. And you get to see people in costumes walking around with rifles. It's quite amusing. It's quite amusing. And you could
teenagers nonetheless.
Yeah. And you could be in the beach and see this girl in a bikini, and then she's got like a M16, you know? It's a funny place. Definitely, as far as useful, I would say if you're a tourist and you go to Israel, don't go into Arab villages or Arab neighborhoods without asking a tour guide or somebody like that whether it's safe. There are some places that are safe. There are certainly places that are not safe. And I think that I actually ran into a couple of Germans a couple of weeks back, and they had a hard time believing me. But yeah, Israel is relatively a very safe place. The crime rate is very low, and you should be fine. But there are places you shouldn't go, and places like East Jerusalem and into the West Bank, you should really be careful. So that's a useful fact.
When I said benefit, I just meant like for their amusement, honestly.
I see.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously useful information, but that's kind of what I was going for.
Oh, not so amusing though. You were going more for the rifle thing.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you one thing though. Jews have their own special kind of donut. Yep. So on the same festival I told you before, Purim, right? It has something to do with a miracle that had to do with oil and stuff. I'm not going to go into it, but all the foods of the festival are made with oil. So there's this deep fried donut called a sufganiya, right? And they put like jam in it. They put like strawberry jam, I think. And then they sprinkle white, like powdered sugar on it. And it is the most addictive thing in the world. Like you will start eating them and then you won't stop. And every single year you hear people say like, this year I'm only going to have one. It's like a common thing people say, like, I'm only having one. I'm having half, you know, for the sake of like festivities. And then afterwards, like after the first or second day of the festival, everybody's complaining that they ate way too much. So if you're in Israel, you should come during Purim and try some of the sufganiyot. They're great.
What time of year is that?
Purim, wow. That's a hard question. I don't do calendars so well. You're going to have to Google it. Sorry.
Okay, yeah,
Sorry.
that's fine. Cool. So moving on. So I know you've had a little bit of limited exposure so far in the United States and in the UK, but from what you've seen so far, how do the cultures compare? What differences do you notice between Israel and the UK and the US that you've observed?
Well, the first thing is that everything is much smaller. Israel is the space-wise, the time that you spend getting from place to place, the size of cars, the size of houses, the size of people, the size, like everything, you don't understand. I'm serious. Everything is smaller in Israel. That's one thing. And another thing I think is the colorfulness of things. I think that Israel tends to be, even though it has many different areas and the areas are different, basically almost every single building in Jerusalem is covered in the same stone. It's called Jerusalem stone, right? And then I arrive in Pittsburgh and every single building is a different color and a different shape and a different size. And I think that Israel, in the different regions, it's very colorful. We have a desert and we have a forest and we have mountains and we have this seashore. But every region within itself is actually quite monotonic. Tel Aviv looks like Tel Aviv and Jerusalem looks like Jerusalem. And in England, it wasn't like that at all. Like when I was in London, like every you take 3 steps and it's just completely different. So that's one. The other thing is, of course, the drinking age. I mean, it's more than drinking age. Like in Israel, if you're let's say above 14, like 14, 15 already, then you're already drinking and you're drinking like downtown or in the streets or whatever. And it's a fact. It's not that the cops don't try to stop it. They do sort of a little bit, but everybody does it anyway. And you're just, as long as you're not an idiot about it, like nobody's going to really do anything. Whereas like in America, I don't really see teenagers drinking like on like street corners or anything. I mean, I guess I haven't been in all America, but.
Well, that's just like a recipe for disaster over here.
Well, I'll tell you, that's another very big difference is that, Israelis mature a lot faster than Americans. Like I see like kids that must be like, I don't know, 18, 19. And they're with their parents and they're like, oh, I don't want to take the bus. Let's take a taxi or like, I can't do this for myself and things like that. I also see that a lot with Americans that come over to visit Israel where they have to have somebody explain things to them. And Israelis as a culture, they tend to be relatively hard people. They try to be realists in general, I think. But they're a little bit harsh. And they do deal with it's a harsh reality to live in Israel. It's a safe place, but a lot of people sacrifice a lot for it to be a safe place. And so I think that in general, the culture, people grow up a lot faster. There's much less drama between Israelis, like they don't like drama. They don't like silly things and they don't like people asking for help when they can actually deal with stuff themselves, And an Israeli is more likely to just go to somewhere and he might get a little lost, but just deal with it and just figure it out. Whereas I feel like Americans are much more likely to need to know the plan and need to know where everything is and have everything set up. I think that's also a very big difference, actually.
And so, what would you say is your absolute favorite thing about Israel? What makes you super proud to be an Israeli?
Well, that's such a hard question, but so simple at the same time. It's just an amazing country in the sense that I really believe that most Israelis have a drive. And that drive pushes them to do what they believe is most important. I feel like most Israelis are very passionate about what they do, about where they are in their life, and not specifically in a religious way. But most of them are very patriotic, and I think that all those things combined create a country where so much is created and so much is invented. We completely revolutionized irrigation system with drip irrigation, right? And we import that to India and all over Asia. We completely revolutionized guns. We have plastic guns. The Israeli, the IDF Tavor, which is also sold all over South America. Like I said before, chips that go into every single laptop that you buy has a chip that was completely invented in Israel. Heart surgery, everything you can possibly think of. The country is very passionate about advancing the world, advancing everything. And I think that gives Israelis in general the ability to create amazing things that really change people's lives. And I think that's beautiful.
And would you say that's also the most underrated aspect about Israel?
I think the most underrated aspect about Israel is that Israelis, what they want to do is live their life in peace and do good. And I feel like, I read a lot and watch a lot of news media. And it's just not how we're described. I think that also usually Israel itself doesn't describe. I think the public relations in Israelis aren't good at public relations. That's a fact. But usually we're described in the media as like, I don't know, these crazy, horrible villains, or even if not, then we're described as like locked in this internal conflict that can never be solved. And I think that that's completely not related to what Israel is in its core. There are some difficulties, but there are difficulties all over the world with all kinds of people. And our difficulty is not special or different from other people's difficulties. If it's the West Bank, then you got like Turkey and Cyprus have their own little fight. And I can give you 101 examples of different countries that have tensions and problems and racial problems and cultural problems. But none of that is Israel. Those are some small parts of Israel. And I feel like it's very underrated, how much Israelis, what they really want is just to live in peace and just do well.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because, again, like I've said before, our goal on this podcast is to bypass media bias, and we all know that the media is out for profits and clicks and all that garbage. So, moving on to the final question, if you were to recommend a fiction or a nonfiction book to learn more about the country, what would you recommend?
So if you want to read the book that was basically the idea that started the state of Israel, the modern state of Israel, then you read Alt Neuland, I guess you would say in an American accent.
Is it in German?
Austrian, I think.
Alt Neuland, yeah.
Yeah. Which was written by Theodor Herzl, who was basically the man who single-handedly invented the idea of a Jewish state in its modern form, definitely. I mean, Jews have always prayed for a kingdom in Israel, but the way that the state is today was his idea, and that is actually a novel about it. If you want to read a book if you want to understand Jews in general, if you want to understand where their life comes from and where their thought process comes from, you just have to read the Bible because it's just the center, it's the cornerstone for all things Jewish. And I mentioned it before, but if you want to read a book about Israeli innovation and what Israel is doing, then Startup Nation is a great place to start.
Cool. So that's all the questions we have, Kevin. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. This was a very informative podcast. And it's very important, too, because that part of the world is just so contentious right now. So it's great to get a local perspective on it. It's similar to how we had the Syria podcast. You forget that people just live normal lives there when all the media is telling you that everyone's like killing each other or just wants to blow up the entire world and things like that. So it's very refreshing to hear like a very human point of view.
I mean, yeah, 100%. It's just, it's surprising, but Israel is just such a quiet place. It really is. It's tranquil. It really is. Most of it is just tranquil. It's great.
Yeah, that's definitely the impression I got from this interview. But yeah, great podcast episode. Really happy to have you on. And to the audience, hope you really enjoyed this episode. I know I did. And remember to tune in next week for more awesome content. And until then, it's your world. Own it.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Lost Geographer podcast. Remember to tune in next week for another episode to aid you on your journey towards geographic and cultural literacy. In order to help spread the word, please rate, review, subscribe, and share the podcast so that we can help create a new wave of understanding in our world. Remember, it's your world. Own it.